What role does wealth play in a meaningful life? Many of us struggle with questions about how to balance material success or lack of material success with our spiritual or ethical values. We may wonder whether having a lot or having very little will somehow interfere with our ability to understand and practice the Dharma. So in this video, what I want to do is to look at the Buddha's teachings on wealth, how they intersect with the path of practice, and consider what his advice might mean for those of us with a lot of wealth and those of us with very little. First, I want to talk a bit about the Buddha's attitude on wealth and poverty. In the Buddha's view, wealth, financial stability, supported our well-being. It made us happier in many ways. The Buddha did not criticize wealth that was gained, in his terms, legitimately. As he says, legitimate wealth earned by one's own efforts and initiative, built up with one's own hands, gathered by the sweat of the brow. That is, he's talking about honest wealth, honestly gained. In one of the early suttas, the Buddha is talking with Anathapindika, one of the Buddha's wealthy lay donors, about several reasons that one might have to amass great wealth. The Buddha says that one should amass great wealth in order to make oneself and other people around one happy. One should also do so in order to protect oneself from the dangers of life, many of the dangers of life anyhow. We can also amass wealth in order to be able to make donations to, he says, kings, which we might analogize as paying taxes, that we're going to be able to pay more in taxes if we have great wealth, help the kingship or the state that we live in, as well as make donations to people who are in need, to Brahmins, to ascetics, and of course to the Buddhist Sangha itself. In the Buddha's discourse to Sigalika as well, another layperson, the Buddha discusses the way that one should approach one's wealth, that the effective, the skillful layperson should divide their wealth up into 4 equal parts, that one part should be used to enjoy with oneself and the people around one, 2 parts should be used to invest or reinvest, we might say, in the business that one is engaged in, and the last quarter should be, I should say, kept aside to use in difficult times. The Buddha also, in a couple of suttas, argued against those who simply piled up their wealth without attempting to make use of it to make themselves and other people happy, or to be generous and donate it to people who are in need. All of this implies that the Buddha did not feel that wealth was either inherently good or bad, but that rather it was our relationship to that wealth that made all the difference. How we used it, how we approached it psychologically. Poverty, however, is another thing. The Buddha explicitly describes poverty as suffering. In his discourse on the wheel-turning monarch, the Buddha describes how poverty can lead to ethical challenges, since those with nothing have nothing with which to purchase the necessities of life, such as food and clothing. So they end up stealing out of necessity. And then, of course, they're punished by the authorities for stealing what they need to steal to survive. The Buddha goes on to discuss this in respect of the non-righteous monarch who, as he says, from not providing money to the penniless, all these things became widespread. Poverty, theft, swords, killing, lying, backbiting, sexual misconduct, harsh speech and talking nonsense, desire and ill will, wrong view, illicit desire, immoral greed, and wrong custom, and lack of due respect for mother and father, ascetics and Brahmins, and failure to honor the elders in the family. That is, widespread poverty brings about societal collapse. And the unrighteous government is that does not act to try to end this kind of poverty. Second, I want to discuss some challenges and opportunities here. First, for those with wealth. Clearly, wealth provides great opportunities. Opportunities to provide happiness, pleasure for those around us and for oneself. It also provides plenty of opportunity for generosity, for doing generous acts. However, wealth also contains many dangers. Wealth can be a challenge to us if we cling to it or hoard it. As King Pasenadi says, when he was on retreat, he had a certain kind of awareness. He says, "Few are the sentient beings in the world who, when they obtain luxury possessions, don't get indulgent and negligent, giving in to greed for sensual pleasures, and doing the wrong thing by others." And the Buddha goes on to analogize this kind of indulgence in luxuries to a deer that's caught in a trap for bad results for the deer, basically. So we can see that some of the challenges of wealth involve this kind of attachment to luxury, which leads to wrong speech and wrong action. So the question is whether we can learn to use wealth in ways that better align with our values and ethics so that we don't fall into these kinds of traps. Now, for those struggling to make ends meet, there are also going to be challenges and opportunities. As far as the challenges go, they are manifold. As the Buddha says, it's a kind of suffering not to be able to make ends meet, to live in a situation of poverty. As for the opportunities, I don't want to make too many of them, or I should say too much of them, because again, poverty is suffering, and it should not be glorified in any other way. Nevertheless, we can at least say that one with very little recourse to material objects or wealth lives a life that's ideally closer to that of the Buddhist monastic than the person does who is wealthy. At least one has fewer things to indulge in. We may also consider the Buddha's teachings around contentment. Now, again, one who is truly living in poverty is probably never going to be really content because, for example, they may be looking for ways to eat. They may not have enough food or water. So again, I don't want to make too much of this, but if somebody has at least the beginnings of a decent lifestyle, then they can look for ways to be content. Those of us with modest means may indeed live a life that is more content than others who are truly wealthy yet remain incredibly avaricious. The wealthy and avaricious may indeed lead a much less contented life. And the famous statement by the Buddha in the Dhammapada is one that we should keep in mind here, which is that contentment is the ultimate wealth. True wealth is really the contentment with what we already have, what we have around us. And it's really not exemplified by material things anyhow. It's exemplified by our relationships, by our community, by the good that we can do other people, by our searching for calm and kindness in the world. This is how we can find the true joy that wealth can provide, through these kinds of connections. Third, it's important to touch on the relationship between wealth and generosity in specific. In early Buddhism, generosity was an extremely important feature of lay life. When the Buddha gave talks, sermons, discourses to lay audiences, he would typically begin with a discourse on generosity. And two of the greatest of the Buddha's lay disciples were indeed wealthy lay donors to the early Sangha. One of these, the businessman Anathapindika, the wealthiest businessman in Savatthi, it is said, was able to donate an amount that allowed the Buddha's Sangha to acquire Jeta's Grove, which was an extremely important early donation to the Sangha that made it more likely that the Buddha's teachings would survive and be propagated down to the present day. The laywoman Visakha was also another important early donor to the Sangha. She's listed as the greatest female lay donor in the suttas. Visakha is said to have had business with King Pasenadi that did not turn out to her a benefit. She was not happy with this business that she was doing, that she was having with the king. And the Buddha used this example to describe how, he says, all under another's control is suffering. That is, even the wealthiest among us can at times be under the control of others. But however, taking that as the case, we can be in control of how we decide to be generous or not generous. Through that generosity, we can help alleviate the suffering, at least in a small way, of those around us. However, generosity is not simply for the wealthy. Even those with little or nothing to give can give their time, can give help, can give kindness to other people. Indeed, the Buddha himself says that the giving of kindness is more important than the giving of material objects. As he said, "Mendicants, suppose one person was to give a gift of 100 pots of rice in the morning, at midday, and in the evening, and someone else was to develop a heart of love, even just as long as it takes to pull a cow's udder. The latter would be more fruitful." So ask yourself what you can give, either financially or materially, or through giving your time, your effort, your help, your kindness to others around you. All generosity, including the generosity of simply cultivating a kind and generous mind, is beneficial for the Buddha, no matter how small it may seem. So in conclusion, when talking about wealth and the Dharma, whether we are truly wealthy or don't have anything, we should focus the same on what really does matter, which is community, which is relationships with other people, which is our own ethical living, and our personal practice of betterment. Can you be wealthy and follow the Dharma? Of course you can. Can you be poor and follow the Dharma? Of course you can. What matters is not wealth itself. For the Buddha, wealth was not the issue, although it could be a danger. It had various dangers associated with it. Rather, it was our relationship to that wealth that mattered. Whether we're wealthy or not, the teachings help us to use our resources mindfully, cultivate generosity in all of its forms, and focus on those activities that provide lasting joy and benefit to ourselves and those around us. So Buddhist practice isn't at all about how much or how little you have, but rather about how you approach your life. Small, skillful actions such as simplifying the life that you have, such as sharing generously with others, such as being grateful, practicing gratitude for what you have, all can be ways to transform your life in a better direction. They can help transform your relationship to wealth and lead to greater peace. So my question for you now is, how does wealth affect your own practice? How do you relate to that wealth? How might you align your spiritual values with your financial choices? If you'd like to hear more about the wealthy lay donor Anathapindika, I did a video on him a while back, and I'll leave a link to that up here on the screen if you want to see it. Thanks so much for taking a look. If you're interested in these videos of mine and getting something out of them, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked up here on the screen and down below in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel and the work that I'm doing here. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you, be well.